media channels.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Lily Bayer. I'm a reporter at Politico in Brussels. For those of you who don't know our publication, we cover policy and politics in the EU. I'm very excited to be here today with this panel. We have a lot to talk about. It's a very exciting time and difficult time for the European economy. Just last month, there was a very big negotiation here in Brussels. All 27 heads of state and government were here, and they decided on a big budget and recovery package, 1.82 trillion euros. That is set to have a big impact on the economy, also in Central Europe. Today's subject is the disruption as Central Europe's accelerator for deep economic overhaul. And of course, the disruption meaning primarily, I think, the coronavirus crisis, how it has impacted economies in the region, and how perhaps the fight against the crisis and the recovery process could help transform the region's economies. Today with us, we have four very special guests. First of all, we have Dragoș Pislaru. He's a member of the European Parliament from Romania. He is also a former Minister of Labor in Romania, and he's a member of Renew Europe. Welcome. We also have Laszlo Andor, who is a former European Commissioner. He is currently the Secretary General of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. We also have Alexander Resch, who is the CEO of VUB Bank in Slovakia. Welcome. And we also have Sonia Muzikarova from our host, Globsec. She is the chief economist at Globsec. Thank you all for being with us today. And I'd like to remind the audience that you will have an opportunity at the end to pose questions. And I really encourage you to, because we're very curious to see what sparks your interest, and I'm sure our panelists would be happy to answer as many questions as possible. So to start off, I think it would be very good for us to keep in mind the extent of the disruption to Central Europe's economies. So Sonia, would you mind perhaps giving us an overview of the current economic situation? What has been the impact of COVID over the past few months? I can't hear Sonia. Okay. Should I do that now? Okay. I'm sorry, everyone. We seem to have a bit of a technical problem hearing Sonia. So in the meantime, if we could perhaps go to Dragos. Dragos, before the session, was just telling us that he has been working on the Parliament's position on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is this big pot of money that will be going to member states to help with the economic recovery following the COVID crisis. Dragos, what do you think are the lessons learned from the crisis, and how can Central Europe effectively use this new EU money?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a delight to be alongside such fellow panelists and to talk here at this event. Indeed, I mean, the title of the debate was actually quite in line with my feeling and the lives, the changes that we are currently living. It's been told by everyone these months that in every crisis lies an opportunity, and I do believe indeed that we have an opportunity both to raise the ambition at the European level and also to see better the challenges at the Central and Eastern European level for the Central and Eastern European countries, and to see in comparison with Western Europe how we are actually faring. Now, we all knew the structural problems that we are facing in this part of Europe, in the Central and Eastern part of Europe. The crisis has actually revealed those structural problems even further, and I would actually say that we see right now why we need to increase basically the resilience of the entire European Union and to act together in this particular process. And there are three main dilemmas, and then I will go a little bit on the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Program, and the next generation, the solution that European Union is actually putting forward. The three challenges that we are actually facing is that, and I'm talking here, I'm putting myself in the shoes of any government in the area. So first of all, you need to fix things that have been, affected by the crisis, and fixing things refer to things that are right now obviously, lagged in terms of the investment projects that have been a couple of some time ago planned. Also, we are also fixing things that are the direct effect of the crisis, that is more or less creating new jobs or creating ways for the companies to come back to their activity, insolvency programs, furlough schemes, and so on and so forth. But that's one thing. The other thing that we have right now as an opportunity, and especially for Central and Eastern Europe, I would say, is to basically leapfrog, to use this opportunity to actually make that bold step forward, to increase the potential GDP, to go on for innovation, to go on for technologies, be that in the green, digital, or other economic ecosystems, as they are actually called right now in the draft of the new European industrial policy. So the first big challenge is what would be the mix in between fixing things and looking forward, leapfrogging, going, raising the bar for the European project. So, and this is actually very, very important. And I would say that the member states, the countries that will choose to do the leapfrogging would be actually better off, I would. The second challenge, very quickly, would be referring to an integrated approach. So it's a silo policy. Right now, there is a tendency, even in Brussels, to talk about green and go very deep on green, to talk about digital, very deep on that. We talk about the economic and the companies and so on. But at the same time, there is evidence that we need social resilience, we need institutional resilience, and we need to talk about our youth, obviously. And if we don't have an integrated approach, if we are not working together, then we are going to have a problem. So I would say the big challenge would be indeed how to actually work out solutions that will be integrated and not, sectoral. And the last challenge that I would say is directly linked to the young generation. And I'm saying that by looking at opinion polls and looking at the fact that the young people are not necessarily, let's say, ecstatic about the EU. There are some worrying trends going on. And if you call a package the next generation EU, and you are not going to tackle directly the opportunities and access of young people, and talking about the children guarantee perhaps, then it's going to be a problem. And I would say that there is a big challenge that includes the demographic challenge and the fact that the elderly have been much more exposed to the crisis than other parts of the population, and the fact that everything is changing and there will be a polarization of generations, threatening to tear apart the social strata in Europe. So 3 challenges. What we need and what we hope to deliver to the RRF is to be able to do both the fixing and raising the ambition, to have an integrated view. And then in the design of the RRF, I'm actually very pleased to tell you, right now, before everything goes public, that we're going to have 6 pillars. So green, digital, competitiveness, social, institutional, and next generation. And by saying that, obviously addressing the 3rd challenge, that is the demographic challenge. And this is actually the package that obviously needs to be adapted by each of the member states of the countries in the Central Eastern Europe. But it will actually create a leverage at the EU level. It will have an impact at EU level if we are actually going to follow that as a particular strategic view on how to move further. So I'm very optimistic about it. I don't think that we are just having a helicopter money, that will actually spread money around. I think that there will be a clear link with the European semester, and we have the chance to be stronger together in this particular process. So I have the news that I can bring you, that there are good prospects for CE countries to not only to recover, but to become much more resilient for the future shocks.
Thank you so much, Dragos. I was wondering if we could next go to Laszlo, who perhaps could give us his view specifically on the situation in Hungary. How has COVID impacted Hungary's economy, and what do you think are the lessons that should be learned there?
Let me thank you for the invitation, and it's really an honor to be able to join. Indeed, the picture of Central and Eastern Europe is fascinating because in the past decade, or we can even speak about 15 years, there has been a strong convergence process. The growth rates of this region, although unevenly, have been much higher, including in Hungary, including in other countries, than the Euro area. And I agree with the previous speaker, Mr. Pistaro, that it's a major question how to ensure that after this disruption, we are not losing momentum. Quite the contrary, how to gain some kind of new momentum. And I think we would probably agree that this region would need to somehow reconsider the growth model. Why would it need to happen? First of all, because this is not the first disruption. Already 10 years ago, in 2009, the Great Recession also affected this region. And while before the Great Recession, the growth rates in the Visegrad countries were about dynamic convergence process, that was not reproducible after the Great Recession. So the growth rates only became about twice as high as in Western Europe. And I think it would already be a great achievement if this could be restored. However, what happened in the meantime, especially in the last 5-6 years, a major outflow of human capital. I think the importance of the outflow of labor should not be underestimated. Because already in the last 5-6 years, we have seen that this became a bottleneck on industrial growth and other types of economic growth. And you were asking me, Lily, about Hungary specifically. I think Hungary is also a remarkable example of this bottleneck, because originally the Hungarian force was not as mobile as the Polish or as the Baltic or as the Romanian, but increasingly it became very, very mobile as the austerity initially the transitional restrictions expired in 2011, the so-called 7-year transitional period, and the industrial relations got much worse, and social rights and labor rights and wages were undermined following 2011 and 12 with the new labor code. So there were many push factors which sent hundreds of thousands of people to other countries. And obviously, when a new multinational comes today, it's more difficult to find the right workforce. And the drivers of foreign investment, which were very effective before, low taxation, cost competitiveness from the wage side and other aspects, are not going to be as strong to deliver investment and growth and job creation as before. So in any case, in Hungary as well as other countries, there will be an opportunity to reconsider the model of growth, how to escape from the of cost competitiveness and move towards higher value added, which also requires more investment, more systematic investment in human capital. On this point, I would reconnect with the question of the European Union budget, because from our region, from my country also, there is very often a kind of shortcut. When we speak about EU transfers, EU money, we think about infrastructure development. Railway, renovation of the main square, very costly, especially if you want to the population by this type of activities. But the point is to shift towards more human capital. And in a way, the member states, including in East Central Europe, and I think this could be a general encouragement, particularly for countries which experience the labor outflow, like Hungary, for example, to invest more in human capital, reinforce the resilience of the school system, the labor market institutions, the training systems, in order to provide better conditions for the workforce itself, but also for the investors would come and, of course, will compare the member states not only from the point of view of taxation, but also from the point of view of available human resources.
Thank you so much. I'm told that Sonia's technical problem has been resolved. So I'll ask you again, Sonia, perhaps to give us an overview of the impact of the crisis on the region's economies right now.
Yes, thank you very much. And I hope you can now hear me. So overall, the Central European economies managed the pandemic quite well in the initial wave, with relatively contained infection rates and some of the lowest per capita death rates within Europe. This good management of the crisis surprised to the upside, as the government efficiency is not exactly top rated, and neither are the healthcare systems. And also these countries are not exactly technological leaders, so their response couldn't really rely on intelligent solutions and tracking apps. And even there was a leadership switch in Slovakia at the beginning of March. So it was a very good management of the crisis, given all of these features and circumstances. There is a shared consensus that the management was successful mainly due to the speed of the measures institutionalized. Mostly, these measures were basically put in place before these countries hit the 100 case benchmark, or even before the first death. So the infection curve did not hit exponential growth. So this was very important. And in terms of the health and containment measures, I mean, there were the usual travel restrictions, quarantines, closures of non-essential business, and also limiting production at industrial sites, which of course took a toll on the economy of Central and Eastern Europe. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk about briefly about the main pillars of the policy response in these countries and beyond. Basically, on a global scale, the response is unprecedented with direct fiscal stimulus reaching 7% of 2019 GDP. And the scale of fiscal response significantly exceeded that after great financial crisis. That's also important to note. On the monetary policy front, central banks stepped up their already very accommodative stance. We've seen rate cuts where possible in Czechia, in Poland. We've seen various calibrations on bond buying programs, launching of new liquidity lines to support the real economy through the banking sector, and also macroprudential policies, relaxation of credit provision requirements, and alleviation of capital buffers. Overall, we can say that the central bank response was timely, it was coordinated, cohesive, and heavily also drawing on the great financial crisis playbook and even going beyond it. On the fiscal front, and I'm now talking about discretionary fiscal measures, the response was more fragmented, a little less coordinated, and also it differed in terms of size of the fiscal impulse in Europe. So to give you a flavor, the direct fiscal measures varied from around 3% in, for example, Poland or Spain to about 4.5% in France and Italy to about 8% in Germany. And in smaller Central European countries, they were modest, between 1 to 3%. In terms of substance, these policies targeted mostly saving firms and workers. It was a policy mix consisting of financial provisions, liquidity provisions, and also tax and social provisions. Of course, the healthcare funding was expanded, and government guarantees also played a very large role. In addition, there was the European response, and I think that deserves a separate space and a separate discussion, so I will leave that aside for later. In terms of impacts on the real economy, so basically there was the direct hit on both the demand and supply side for these Central European economies, but there was also the hit going through the external channel, as we know that these economies are opened and they are very closely knit in global value chains. So the overall impact on these economies. So just to give you an idea, in the first quarter, actually, Slovakia contracted the most in the region at -3.8 on an annual basis. This was worse, for example, than in Germany and worse than the European averages. More closer actually to the Southern European peers that were harder hit by the pandemic. But in the second quarter, actually, the numbers surprised to the upside. So I think the bottom line and what we can conclude based on this is that there will be surprises, there will be revisions, because we know that the quality of macroeconomic data and national accounts are not exactly the best, especially during the time of crisis and turbulence. In terms of outlook, also the OECD, the European Commission, and the IMF forecast very greatly for these countries, for Slovakia, ranging from -6 to -11 for 2020, for the Czech Republic -6 to -13, with about 4 to 5% bounce back in 2021 projected, but it's a wide range of outcomes and we'll see. So this is where we are at, and in Slovakia, the second wave has already been confirmed by the authorities, just like in many other countries in Europe. So a lot is to be seen, and over back to Lily so we can move to more interesting parts of this discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Sonia. Really fascinating. And I'm very curious how the numbers are going to evolve in terms of the economic data over the coming months. Alexander, you have a very unique perspective on this panel because you are coming from the private sector. So I was wondering, from your perspective as the head of a bank in Slovakia, what are the lessons from this crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you very much also for this invitation and the opportunity to participate. As you correctly said, I'm coming from the private sector, so I have a little bit a different view or input or perspective from this point of view. Sonia already mentioned a lot of things related to Slovakia. So for me, based on my 30 years experience in banking, what we have gone through since the beginning of the year was really extraordinary, because never ever we have seen such a crisis, especially coming from a health perspective point of view, from the pandemic, which basically gave just one measure, a countermeasure, and the countermeasure was social distancing, which means an economic lockdown. And as Sonia was saying, the new administration, the outgoing and the new administration in Slovakia reacted very quickly, very promptly, in a very severe way, which saved a lot of lives, I believe. They did a very good job here. But it had an impact, and the impact was that overnight, basically the whole ecosystem, economic system, came to a standstill. Families were losing their regular income, for instance. Companies overnight lost their sales opportunities, were sitting on their stocks, not coming in cash flows. Even the public administration had problems to sustain this financing, because there were some bonds to be issued and there were some liquidity constraints. So what proved in this moment very crucial was the close cooperation between various actors, and I must say what I have experienced in this period, the cooperation with the public administration, with the national bank in particular as well, was really extraordinarily good. And what proved crucial in this moment was to have a very well set up business continuity management. In the past, we were always a little bit thinking as a theoretical exercise, business continuity management. But in this moment, it proved crucial to be able to switch from one day to another to a complete different setup of your daily life, of your daily operations, and so on. And that happened extremely quickly. And that helped us, for instance, if we talk about the banking sector, helped quickly to discuss with the public administration and to discuss with the central bank to come up with a very good moratorium, which was very much flexible. It's one of the most flexible in the region, which helped a lot of families to overcome this, let's say, missing income, regular income. The other side was immediately safeguarding liquidity to the companies as such. So we were preparing several backup facilities also together with the National Bank, and at the end, obviously also for the public administration, where we were able to commit bond issuance in such amount that it was easily to be covered all the needs for all the aids which needed to be set up. So from this perspective, for me, it was very crucial to have this business continuity management set up in such an open way, and not only as a single operator, but as a sector and as a system. Then once we have settled this, obviously immediately new business, we lost a lot of new business in certain product areas. We lost up to 90%. So you needed to quickly rethink how to do your daily operations, and not only banking, all the sectors. And I must say, people have been very creative, have been very responsive in coming up with new ideas how to rethink from physical presence to, let's say, digital presence, yeah? And this means how you identify the counterpart, how do you authorize certain transaction, and all this type of stuff. You needed to cope, you found out you had a lot of capacities which were idle, were not used. What do you do with this overcapacity? And what will you do in the future? Because you could already foreseen that there will be a lot of overcapacities. I'm talking about, for instance, offices, space. There will be a lot of things which will change with the smart working concept, which will for sure come. And last but not least, also the whole supply management, operational risk. Overnight you lost your regular supply, how you deal with it, what is the backup. So there were a lot of learnings, and I think Slovakia as such responded very well. And also the hit was hardest, as Sonia was saying, but also the recovery right now in the second quarter, and also what we can see in the last months, the feedback I get from the economic players, the recovery is faster than expected, which is very, very good. We will need to see how this is going to change in the upcoming weeks and months. So we are in the middle of a second wave. So how we will deal with that. So, but I'm very much positive also because I have seen a change in the attitude of the people. In the moment we were suffering the biggest crisis, I have seen so many people standing to each other, helping each other, supporting each other, mobilizing the community to face this health crisis, this human crisis. It was much more important to help each other than all the others. So I'm very positive about that we will manage that. And this, according to me, represents a unique opportunity to rethink our economical setup. And this is very much true for Slovakia.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Really fascinating how the banking sector has been doing. Dragos, we talked a bit about Hungary, we talked about Slovakia, so I was wondering if maybe you could put on your Romanian politician hat and tell us a little bit about how Romania has been coping with this crisis economically. I was reading a few weeks ago the COVID numbers were relatively high in Romania. What do you think the lessons are for the Romanian economy?
First of all, I am so amazed of the commonalities that we've been talking about in this panel. Hungary, Slovakia, and I mean, a lot of things are actually very valid for Romania as such. Romania, I mean, obviously we've been witnessing in all these countries and across Europe what can be called a dual shock, both on the demand and the supply. I mean, the shock has been symmetrical throughout Europe, basically. So I will not go again in what happened as a consequence. I will talk a little bit about the reaction of the Romanian government and what's actually happening right now. So the reaction was quite swift, I would say. The authorities have actually launched immediately a furlough scheme. And then later on, they even introduced Kurzarbeit type scheme related to, you know, more or less the flexible labor arrangements and somehow to take some of the burden of the companies that have been shut down in the lockdown or even afterwards, especially the HoReCa industry and so on. At the same time, obviously, as was described by Alexander, there were a lot of investments that have been actually postponed. So basically what we have been witnessing is a try from the government to more or less substitute the private investment with some sort of a stimulus for public investment. So right now, a lot of the projects that have been postponed over the years have actually been brought in some investment plan that the government is putting forward to actually push things from this particular perspective. So a public investment stimulus was there. Unfortunately, after a very successful effort of the government to contain the effect of the crisis, people have relaxed. And when we are calling about, you know, we are actually using the word relaxation. So actually everyone got that relaxed over the summer that unfortunately no one respected the basic rules. You know, simple things like wearing the mask and, you know, keeping the physical distance and so on, which led actually to some sort of a second wave. And Romania, it's still there trying to struggle with this trend that was quite visible actually in terms of new cases and deceased cases per 1,000 inhabitants and so on. Right now, I would say that the situation has more or less stabilized, and we will probably see some improvement in the period that comes. What is one lesson learned that I think it's actually crucial for the future as well is how do you communicate with the population and with the economic sector. So the lack of predictability is actually sometimes worse than a particular shock that you have. And I mean, there are a lot of questions in the air, when we are reopening the activities, what are the rules that we need to respect, what are we going to do, what's the regulation that we are looking at, and so on. So one of the commonalities that I've seen in other countries is where you had a more empathic communication, a more clear discussion and transparency towards the population and the business sector, the results were better. When you adopted a more like military style thing, saying, we are closing here and closing there and opening there only in some conditions, and not, without having the clarity, then what actually was the result is that people either didn't respect the rules, or businesses, because we are talking about the economy, were actually diffident in going further with investments and so on. I would like to end this intervention by saying that in terms of the perspectives, indeed, as was mentioned here by fellow panelists, we are looking at a reset. We are looking at a model that we can develop, in unprecedented ways, because we have the funding available from the EU, and we have the right momentum to do so. And I will just, talk about three things very, very briefly. First, you have the technology aspect. Right now, Europe wants to gain back the leadership in technology, at worldwide level. And the Green Deal is part of that. Digital is part of that. The ecosystems and the industrial policy are part of that. So Central and Eastern Europe can actually, play there with the big guys. I mean, we can actually be there and create hubs and ecosystems and value chains that can actually be there for the green technology, the digital technology, and other ecosystems. The second thing is about solidarity, and Alexander has described very well this feeling of solidarity that we felt. It's actually a very, very good opportunity to translate into reforms, real reforms of our social assistance, so let's say systems that we have in Central and Eastern Europe, and some of the social assistance systems are not going so well, are not that efficient, are not covering the ones that are left behind. And thirdly, and this is actually very, very important as well, it's a period in which we need to look at the next generation and to look about access to education and health. And for that, obviously, you need reforms as well. So, economy, it's one thing. The other thing is the social part, and then education and health are also two major opportunities that we have to go on and activate for the near future.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if we've reconnected to Laszlo, but in case we have, Laszlo, my question to you is, we've heard a lot of ideas, and one thing that everyone seems to be touching upon a bit is this idea that perhaps the crisis could help the region transition a bit. So what do you think could be done to help the region move up to higher value-added functions?
Can you hear me? I think that's an important question.
Yes, we can hear you.
I could hear you well. Okay, fantastic.
Great.
Look, I think several speakers mentioned the importance of education, and I think this needs to be highlighted also because there is an alarming element in the COVID crisis situation. I think we all welcome the possibilities to implement new models of online learning. However, I think we also learned in the spring and summer period that the online education is not a perfect replacement of the real schooling, especially when it comes to primary and secondary education. So one way or another, I think societies would need to make some kind of sacrifice in order to ensure that kids can return to schools, maybe not full-time, but at least part-time, and then re-socialize and return to the routine of systematic learning, because otherwise the gap is going to be very, very serious, which separates various social groups from the point of view of skill levels and the competitiveness on the labor market in the future. If I compare the current crisis with the previous one, I'm sure you also remember there was an enormously high level of youth unemployment in the previous crisis. That's why we had to come forward with policies like the youth guarantee. And by the way, Slovakia was also one of the countries where it had to be rolled out very, very quickly. And but at least at that time, the narrative was that the new generation is very well trained. The key question is how they are connected with the labor market. And I think now, because of the COVID crisis, there is a new narrative. Because if the extraordinary circumstances continue for too long, we will not be able to say that the new generation is better trained than the previous one, because the damage is going to be serious and long-lasting. So somehow reinventing proper schooling and training under the current circumstances, also by using the opportunities of investing from EU funds, is going to be absolutely crucial.
Thank you. I just want to remind the audience that you can submit questions and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. Alexander, one thing that I found really interesting is when you talked about how well the public administration has done from your perspective during the beginning of the crisis for the private sector. I was wondering if there's anything that you think the EU should be doing that would help the banking sector in Central Europe get through this crisis, or perhaps recover following the crisis.
Well, in principle, I think the banking union is very much influenced on a European basis. So when we were having this kind of discussion, there was a very close coordination with the European central banks. Most of our systemic relevant banks are anyhow under direct supervision of the ECB. So from this perspective point of view, I think there is a lot done. There's still a lot to be done, but this goes beyond, let's say, banking regulation as such. It is very much important to have also common legislative principles and so on, which would, for instance, help to go on with cross borders, mergers and this type of stuff. But maybe coming back to this unique opportunity which we have right now, in particular Slovakia has right now, to get out from the mid-income trap, the so classical middle income trap, is really we need to transform in a knowledge-based economy. And this clearly, as both of my fellow partners here were saying, Laszlo and Dragos, it is very crucial that we talk about education. And that goes from the kindergarten, goes to the primary, secondary school, and goes also to, obviously, the university education. It is very much important, the link to the private sector, as it was mentioned as well. So from this, the human capital, and we need to create that, and we don't have it right now. We are not ready to face the challenge, at least in the regions we are operating. So there are huge challenges. Besides this, what I would say, another crucial factor is to create a proper business climate, which means that we have an easy way how to do this research and development, to bring in innovation, to bring in new ideas, to test new ideas. Not all of them will work out, so there will be also failures naturally, but so that we can really facilitate this. And this requires some institutional setting, which currently is missing. And I think there is also where public administration, quality of public administration is very much needed to favor this, because this will create an environment which will be allowing us to transform in a knowledge-based economy, which is necessary.
Before we go into the questions, Sonia, if you would like to quickly have a last word. We've heard a lot of ideas about how economies can be transformed and strengthened. From your perspective as an economist, what are the core lessons? What needs to change for Central Europe's economies?
So, I mean, every country is different, and there is no one size fits all in terms of innovation strategy that works for every country. But I am quite fascinated by the proposition of a leading author. Her name is Mariana Mazzucato, and she has been basically arguing in favor of governments taking a more active role in innovation strategies, and that they could be more active market co-creators, not only market fixers, so to say. And this is also related to another recent trend, the recent proliferation of strategic PPPs that have worked really well. They are longer-term public-private partnerships. They are bigger in scope. And I think they're trying to address big challenges such as combating climate change, unemployment, or at the technological frontier, such as focusing on industrial strategy. And I think they have worked because they're mutually beneficial. They reduce risk for the private sector, and they also enable governments to harness private sectors on the ground creative capacity and maximize gains from research investments at the times of constrained budgets. So I think this is also very important in the current times, in the current environment. Also, governments need to be asking themselves the right questions. So where in the economy, for example, to focus the innovation and the upgrading of domestic capacities to achieve leapfrogging in terms of productivity and greater value added. And in the Central European context, where a significant part of the GDP is associated with global value chains, policymakers should concern themselves with how domestic firms can capture a greater share of higher value added. And of course, the success of any innovation strategy depends on governance and execution. So, like-minded coalition may partly fill in the void where, for example, political leadership is either short-sighted or is not really having it as an imperative, the long-term innovation strategy. So I will stop here because I think we're running out of time, but those were just a few examples of innovation strategy that can be helpful and that Central Europe and other regions can rely upon.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. I don't actually see any questions, so unless the organizers have received any, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Alexander, Sonia, Laszlo, Dragos, for this very interesting conversation. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this theme for quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The opening of the first GlobSec office abroad at the beginning of 2020 in Brussels was a natural step to bring the rich experience and expertise of GlobSec, 15 years after its creation, to the lively policy making